The wedding ended at 11:15 p.m. By 7:50 the next morning, the bride was dead. No, wait. Wrong story. Wrong wedding. Wrong death. This story doesn't begin with a bride in white. It begins with hands wrapped around a throat at 35,000 feet, cockpit alarm screaming, and a phone lying on the floor showing 9 messages delivered. It begins with Captain Tariq al-Mazrui realizing that the careful architecture of his double life, 12 years of marriage, 7 years of affair, thousands of hours maintaining the perfect balance, was collapsing in the span of 3 minutes while 342 passengers sat 30 feet behind him, completely unaware that their pilot was becoming a murderer. But to understand how a respected airline captain, a father, a man who prayed 5 times daily and never missed Friday prayers at the Grand Mosque, ended up with blood on his hands and a dead woman at his feet, we need to go back. Back 7 years, to a layover in Bangkok, to a hotel bar where the lighting was low and the music was soft, to the moment Tariq al-Mazrui met a woman who would eventually force him to choose between his reputation and her life. And we know how he chose. Captain Tariq al-Mazrui was 38 years old when this story begins, though the version that matters, the version where everything starts to break, actually started 7 years before that, when he was 31 and already convinced he had life figured out. He flew for Gulfstar Airways, one of the most prestigious carriers in the Middle East, piloting the long-haul routes that younger pilots dreamed about. Abu Dhabi to Bangkok, Abu Dhabi to London, Abu Dhabi to Sydney, routes that kept him away from home for 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours at a stretch. Routes that gave him time zones worth of distance between his real life and whatever else he wanted to build in the margins. At home in Abu Dhabi, Tariq was exactly who he was supposed to be. He lived in a villa in Khalifa City, the kind of address that said success without being ostentatious about it. His wife, Nora, came from a family that had been in Abu Dhabi for 3 generations, the kind of family where everyone knew everyone, where reputations were built over decades and destroyed in an afternoon. She was 35, elegant in the way women from old families often are, comfortable at charity galas and family gatherings, skilled at managing a household and maintaining appearances. Their marriage had lasted 12 years by the time Tariq met Fah. 12 years that looked perfect from the outside. They attended weddings together, sat beside each other at his family's majlis gatherings, posed for photos that Nora posted to her Instagram account with captions about gratitude and blessings. To anyone watching, they were the model of a successful Emirati couple. He had the career. She had the connections. Together, they had the life everyone was supposed to want. What they didn't have, what had slowly evaporated somewhere between year 3 and year 7, was passion. The marriage had become a series of routines. Polite conversations over breakfast, coordinated schedules, separate bedrooms more often than not, justified by his irregular flying schedule and her need for proper rest. They were partners in maintaining a life, but somewhere along the way, they had stopped being lovers. Stopped being the kind of people who stayed up late talking, who surprised each other, who felt anything beyond comfortable companionship. Tariq told himself this was normal. That passion faded. That maturity meant accepting what marriage actually was instead of what movies and songs pretended it should be. He told himself he was content. And then he met Fah. It happened on a layover in Bangkok, 7 years before the cockpit, 7 years before the blood and the lies and the phone showing those 9 damning photographs. Tariq's flight had landed at Suvarnabhumi International just after midnight, and by the time he cleared customs and reached the Sukhumvit Plaza Hotel, it was nearly 2 in the morning. He should have gone straight to his room, should have slept, should have maintained the discipline that had carried him through 2 decades of flying. Instead, he went to the hotel bar. It was nearly empty. A businessman in a rumpled suit nursing whiskey in the corner. A couple speaking French in low, intimate tones. And at the bar itself, sitting alone with a glass of white wine and a novel open in front of her, was Siraporn Chitpanya. She went by Fah. It meant sky in Thai, which she told him was either perfectly fitting or cosmically ironic for a flight attendant. She was 27, working for Siam Sky Airways, between flights herself. She had dark hair that fell past her shoulders, eyes that held intelligence and humor in equal measure, and a smile that made Tariq forget, just for a moment, that he was a married man who prayed 5 times daily and never, ever did things like this. They talked for 2 hours, about flying, about cities they'd seen, about the strange life of living in hotels and airports. She made him laugh, actually laugh, not the polite chuckle he offered at business dinners or family gatherings, but genuine laughter that came from somewhere he'd forgotten existed. When she mentioned she had an early morning flight, He should have said goodnight. Should have gone to his room alone. He didn't. That first night, in a hotel room that looked like every other hotel room in every other city, Tariq felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just desire, though there was plenty of that, but connection. The sense that someone was seeing him, actually seeing him, not as Captain Al-Mazrouei or Nora's husband or a son from a good family, but as simply Tariq. A man who loved flying because it meant freedom, who felt trapped by expectations he'd never questioned, who wanted something more than the careful, constructed life waiting for him back in Abu Dhabi. In the morning, lying beside her as dawn light filtered through the curtains, Tariq made the decision that would eventually lead to a cockpit floor stained with blood. He told her his first lie. "My marriage," he said carefully, "is complicated. We're essentially separated. I'm working on a divorce, but these things take time. Cultural considerations, family. You understand." Fahad looked at him with those dark eyes, and he couldn't tell if she believed him or if she simply wanted to. "How much time?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. That part, at least, was true. "But I want to see you again. I want this to be more than just one night." She smiled, and he felt relief flood through him. Relief that she wasn't walking away. Relief that he didn't have to let this feeling go just yet. "Me too," she said. And with those two words, Tariq Al-Mazrouei built the foundation of his double life. Over the next 6 months, they established a pattern. Tariq would check his flight schedule, then check hers. When their layovers aligned, Bangkok, Singapore, London, they would meet. Hours stolen between flights, between his real life and this other thing he was building. The lies became easier to tell. To Nora, he was simply working more international routes. To his colleagues, he was maximizing his flying hours. To Fah, he was slowly, carefully working toward a divorce that would free him to be with her properly. A year into the affair, Tariq took the next step. He rented an apartment in Dubai Marina, paying cash, signing the lease under a name that wasn't quite his own, Tariq Mahmoud instead of Tariq Al-Mazrouei. One letter, different in the surname, but enough separation to keep the two worlds from colliding. The apartment was small but elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the marina, the kind of place a bachelor might keep. The kind of place where he could be simply Tariq, not Captain Al-Mazrouei. Fah began staying there between her own flights, first just a night here and there, then longer stretches. By the second year, she had clothes in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, her favorite tea in the kitchen. The apartment became their space, separate from his villa in Khalifa City, where Nora maintained their official life. The system required precision. 2 phones, his official one, registered in his name, and a second one purchased with cash, containing only fast contact information and their messaging apps. Calendar management that would have impressed a military strategist, making sure his flight schedules never left gaps that couldn't be explained. Encrypted messaging apps that deleted conversations after 24 hours. Credit cards used for family expenses, cash for everything involving Fah. A separate email account. A whole architecture of deception. And for 5 years it worked. Tariq justified it to himself in 1,000 small ways. He wasn't hurting anyone. Nora had her life, her social circle, her charity work. She didn't ask questions about his schedule because she'd never been particularly interested in the details of his flying. Their marriage had been more arrangement than romance even before Fah, so what was he really taking away from her? And Fah was happy, wasn't she? She had an apartment, financial security, someone who loved her. The divorce would happen eventually, when the time was right, when his next promotion came through, when his father's health improved, when the cultural moment felt appropriate. There was always a reason to wait. Fah, for her part, seemed to accept this. She came from a middle-class family in Bangkok. Her father was a retired teacher. Her mother still worked at a local market. The money Tariq provided, the apartment, the gifts he brought from Singapore and Paris and London, it all represented security she'd never had growing up. She was patient. She trusted him. She believed, or at least said she believed, that eventually he would follow through on his promises. But patience isn't infinite. Trust isn't unbreakable. And promises, when repeated year after year without action, start to sound like lies. By year 7, the cracks were showing. Fah had turned 34. She watched her friends back in Bangkok getting married, having children, building the conventional lives she'd put on hold for a man who kept saying, soon. She'd turned down 2 marriage proposals in those 7 years, one from a Thai businessman, Another from a doctor she'd met on a flight. Both good men. Both offering her exactly what Tariq kept promising but never delivering. A legitimate partnership, a future, a life she wouldn't have to hide. She'd said no to both because she loved Tariq. Because she believed him when he said the divorce was coming. Because 7 years of someone's time had to mean something, didn't it? You couldn't invest 7 years of your life, your youth, your childbearing years, into something that was just a lie. Could you? 3 months before the flight that would end everything, Fah made a discovery that cracked her world open. Nora's Instagram account, which had always been private, suddenly wasn't. Maybe Nora had changed her settings, or maybe Fah had finally figured out how to see it through a friend's account. Either way, she suddenly had access to a feed full of family photos. Tariq at his nephew's graduation, wearing traditional dress, his arm around Nora. Caption, "So proud of our family's next generation." Tariq and Nora at an anniversary dinner, both dressed elegantly, toasting with champagne. Caption, 12 years of blessings. Alhamdulillah. A family vacation to London. The same week Tariq had told Fah he was flying an unexpected charter route. Photos of him at Buckingham Palace, at Harrods, at dinner in Mayfair. With his wife. Fah scrolled through months of these photos in her Dubai Marina apartment, the apartment Tariq paid for, wearing the jewelry Tariq had bought her, and finally understood the truth that had been obvious all along. He had never been separated. He was never filing for divorce. He was living a perfectly happy married life while keeping her as something else entirely. Something convenient, something hidden, something temporary that had somehow stretched into 7 years. She sat on the bed they'd shared, the bed in the apartment that was supposed to be proof of his commitment to building a life with her, and felt 7 years of patience crystallize into something harder, something sharper. If he wouldn't choose her, she would force him to choose. Or she would make sure everyone knew what he'd been hiding. 3 weeks before Flight EY401 departed from Abu Dhabi International, Fah began documenting everything with the kind of methodical precision that comes from 7 years of being lied to. She'd been saving pieces of evidence for years. A screenshot here, a photo there, receipts kept in a folder, voice memos she'd recorded when Tariq made promises she knew even then she might need to prove he'd made. But now she organized it all. Created folders in her cloud storage with dates and locations. Backed everything up twice, 3 times because she'd seen enough movies to know that evidence could disappear if you weren't careful, and she was being very, very careful. The photos alone would have been enough. There were 247 of them, spanning 7 years. Fah and Tariq in Paris, the Eiffel Tower behind them, his arm around her waist, his wedding ring catching the light. In Singapore, outside the Marina Bay Sands, both of them laughing at something she could no longer remember. In London, at a pub in Notting Hill, his hand on her knee under the table. Dozens from the Dubai Marina apartment, intimate photos, bedroom photos, the kind that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Then there were the receipts, hotel rooms booked in his name, jewelry purchased at Cartier in Singapore, at Tiffany's in London, restaurant bills signed with his credit card. A paper trail 7 years long that proved this wasn't a brief affair or a moment of weakness, but a sustained, deliberate double life. The messages were perhaps the most damning. Fah had learned early in their relationship to screenshot conversations before Tariq deleted them from his end. 7 years of "I love you," and "I can't wait to marry you," and just a few more months until I can file the divorce papers. Promises with dates attached. After my promotion in March. Once my sister's wedding is finished in June. When my father's health improves. After the busy season ends. Excuse after excuse, all carefully preserved. And then there were the voice recordings. Fah had started making these 3 years ago, when she'd first begun to suspect that patience alone wouldn't be enough. Tariq talking about the life they'd build together. Tariq explaining in detail how he'd tell his wife, how he'd handle the divorce, how cultural timing was everything, but he was committed to making it happen. Tariq's voice, warm and convincing, promising her a future she now understood he'd never intended to deliver. All of it organized into a single folder. All of it ready to send with a single tap. She labeled the folder 7 years and set it aside. For 2 weeks she carried on as normal. Worked her flights, stayed at the Dubai Marina apartment when her schedule aligned with Tariq's trips. Had dinner with him. Slept beside him, acted like nothing had changed while her phone held the nuclear option in her pocket. She was waiting for the right moment, the moment when confronting him would hurt the most, when the truth would have maximum impact, when he would have no choice but to finally give her an answer that wasn't soon or be patient or when the time is right. She found her moment when she checked the flight schedule for September. Flight EY401, Abu Dhabi to Bangkok, September 15, 2023, 6 hours in the air. Captain Tariq Al-Mazrui. Fah had made it a rule never to request flights where Tariq was captain. Too risky, he'd always said. Too many chances for someone to notice the familiarity between them, the way their eyes might hold contact a second too long, the way they might smile at each other with more warmth than a captain and flight attendant should share. Keep the world separate, he'd insisted. Safer that way. But safety was no longer what Fah wanted. She used every favor she'd accumulated over 7 years with Siam Sky Airways. Called in 6 shifts she'd covered, scheduled trades she'd done, the 1,000 small kindnesses flight crew build up over years of working together. She needed to be on that flight, had to be on that flight. By September 10th, her name was locked into the crew manifest for EY401. When Tariq saw it, 5 days before departure, his stomach dropped. He pulled up the crew list 3 times, hoping he'd misread it, hoping it was a different Siriporn, hoping the system had made a mistake. But there it was, Chitpanya Siriporn, cabin crew. His flight. He called her immediately on the encrypted phone. She let it ring through to voicemail. He called again. On the 4th attempt, she finally answered. Fah, what are you doing? You requested my flight. We need to talk, Tariq. Not on a flight. That's the rule. We don't work together. Your rule. Not mine. Not anymore. Fah, please. Let me get you reassigned. I can call scheduling. Say there's a conflict. There is a conflict. 7 years of conflict. We're going to resolve it. After the flight. I'll come to the apartment. We can talk for as long as you need. I'm done with after. We talk during the flight, Tariq. Or we don't talk at all. She paused. Actually, that's not quite true. If we don't talk on that flight, I'll do the talking. To your wife, to your family, to everyone. The line went dead. Tariq tried to get her removed from the flight. Called scheduling, claimed there was a personality conflict with one of the cabin crew, asked if they could adjust the roster. But it was too late. Crew assignments were locked 72 hours before departure. Unless there was a medical emergency or a family crisis, the roster stood. His options narrowed to a single path: fly the flight with Fah working cabin crew 30 feet behind his cockpit door, and hope he could control whatever she was planning. September 15, 2023, arrived with the kind of clear sky that pilots love. Abu Dhabi International was running smoothly, departures on schedule, no weather delays. At 6:30 in the morning, Tariq arrived for the pre-flight briefing looking every bit the professional captain he'd been for 15 years. His uniform was pressed perfectly. His captain's stripes were polished. His face showed nothing but calm competence. Inside, his mind was racing through scenarios. What would Fah do? Confront him during the flight? Pass him a note? Wait until they landed in Bangkok and have it out there? The uncertainty was worse than knowing. At least if he knew her plan, he could prepare. This way, he was flying blind. The briefing room at 7 a.m. held 12 people. Tariq, his co-pilot, and 10 cabin crew. The co-pilot was Saeed Hassan, 29 years old, Emirati, relatively new to long-haul routes but sharp and competent. The kind of first officer who followed procedures to the letter, who respected the captain's authority, who wouldn't question orders unless something was obviously wrong. Fah was sitting in the back row of the briefing room. She wore her Siam Sky Airways uniform perfectly, her hair pulled back in the regulation style, her makeup subtle and professional. When Tariq entered, she looked up and smiled, the same polite, respectful smile any flight attendant would give her captain. But her eyes held something else. A challenge. Promise. A countdown. Tariq ran through the standard briefing. Weather for the route: clear skies, light winds, smooth flying. Flight time approximately 6 hours. 342 passengers booked, nearly full capacity. Emergency procedures reviewed. Crew positions assigned. His voice was steady, professional, betraying none of the dread sitting like a stone in his chest. Any questions? He asked at the end. Fah raised her hand. Captain Al-Mazrui, I look forward to working with you today. The other crew members nodded agreement, murmured similar sentiments. Standard pre-flight courtesy. But Tariq heard the words underneath. This is happening. Ready or not. "Thank you," he managed. "Let's make it a smooth flight for our passengers." At 9 a.m., boarding began. Tariq was already in the cockpit, running through pre-flight checks with Saeed. Outside, passengers filed through the jetway, finding seats, stowing luggage, settling in for 6 hours in the air. Business class filled first, 18 seats, mostly business travelers and a few tourists who'd splurged. Then economy, row by row, 324 passengers finding their places. Among them, in seat 1A, was a woman Tariq hadn't noticed during his walkthrough. Layla El-Mansouri, age 31, a medical researcher traveling to Bangkok for a conference on infectious disease prevention. She'd boarded early, already seated with her laptop open and noise-canceling headphones on when Tariq had passed through the cabin. She was Nora's cousin, not close but family nonetheless. They saw each other at weddings, at Eid celebrations, at the occasional family gathering. But she didn't see Tariq, didn't glance up at the captain in the cockpit, didn't know that the pilot flying her to Bangkok was her cousin's husband. Just another passenger, absorbed in her pre-flight work, completely unaware of the role she would play in the next 12 hours. At 9:47 a.m., the aircraft door closed. Tariq received clearance from air traffic control. At 10:03 a.m., Flight EY401 pushed back from the gate. By 10:15, they were airborne, climbing through clear morning sky over Abu Dhabi, the city falling away beneath them, golden desert, blue water, glass towers catching the sun. Inside the cockpit, Tariq's hands were steady on the controls. His voice was calm as he communicated with ATC, as he coordinated with Saeed, as he monitored instruments and adjusted course. To anyone watching, he was simply Captain Al-Mazrui doing what he'd done thousands of times before, flying. But his eyes kept flicking to the internal camera that showed the forward cabin. And in that grainy black and white feed, he could see Fah moving through the aisles, serving drinks, smiling at passengers, performing her job with the same professionalism she'd shown for 7 years. Waiting. At 11:30 a.m., they reached cruising altitude, 35,000 feet over the Arabian Sea. Autopilot engaged. Flight path locked. The aircraft was a silver bullet cutting through empty sky, carrying 342 people who trusted that the pilots in command knew what they were doing, that the systems would work, that they would land safely in Bangkok in 5 more hours. None of them knew that in the cockpit, a captain was coming apart. None of them knew that a flight attendant was carrying 7 years of evidence in her phone. None of them knew that in the next 3 hours, everything would explode. Saeed completed his portion of the flight checks and looked at his captain. "Sir, I'm ready for my rest period whenever you want to take over full controls." Standard procedure on long-haul flights, the pilots rotated rest periods to stay fresh. Saeed would transfer control to Tariq, go to the crew rest area for 90 minutes, come back refreshed. It meant Tariq would be alone at the controls, alone in the cockpit. "Go ahead," Tariq heard himself say. "I've got it." Saeed ran through the control transfer checklist, confirmed Tariq had command, and left the cockpit. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Tariq was alone with 342 lives, an aircraft flying itself on autopilot, and the certain knowledge that Fah was about to walk through that door. He didn't have to wait long. At 11:47 a.m., the cockpit door opened. Fah stepped inside, carrying a tray with coffee and a light meal, standard service for the pilots during long flights. She set the tray down on the small fold-out table, her movements efficient and professional. Then she closed the door behind her, locked it from the inside, turned to face him. "Hello, Tariq," she said quietly. "I think it's time we had that talk." Tariq's hands tightened on the armrests of his captain's seat. Through the windscreen, nothing but empty sky and the curve of the earth below. Inside the cockpit, the woman he'd been lying to for 7 years stood between him and the only exit, her flight attendant uniform perfectly pressed, her face calm in a way that terrified him more than if she'd been screaming. "Fah, this isn't the place. We're at 35,000 feet with 342 people depending on you, to be honest?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's interesting, coming from a man who's been lying for 7 years straight. Lower your voice. Saeed is just in the crew rest area. If he hears what? That his respected captain has been living a double life? That the man everyone trusts to fly them safely across oceans can't even be trusted to tell his mistress the truth." Tariq flinched at the word. Mistress. He'd never used that word, never let himself think of Fath that way. In his mind, she was something else, his other life, his escape, the woman who made him feel like more than just Captain Al-Mesroui. But hearing it spoken out loud in the cramped cockpit, with instrument panels glowing and autopilot maintaining course, the word landed with brutal accuracy. That's what she was. That's all she'd ever been. That's not fair, he said quietly. You know what you mean to me. You know I care about you. Care? Fah pulled out her phone, unlocked it with a swift gesture. Let me show you what 7 years of care looks like. She turned the screen toward him. A folder labeled 7 years. Inside, thumbnail images stretched down in an endless scroll. Photos of them together. Screenshots of conversations. Documents he recognized even from a distance, hotel receipts, jewelry purchase confirmations, credit card statements. 247 photos, Fah said, her voice steady but trembling with suppressed emotion. Spanning 7 years. Paris, Singapore, London, Dubai. Every promise you made. Every lie you told. Every time you said soon or be patient, or when the time is right. She swiped through images. There they were at the Eiffel Tower, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing at something long forgotten. There they were in bed at the Dubai Marina apartment, sheets tangled, his wedding ring clearly visible on the nightstand. There they were at a restaurant in Mayfair, his hand covering hers across the table. I documented everything, she continued, because some part of me always knew I might need proof, that the day might come when you try to pretend this never happened, that I was just some crazy woman making things up. She looked at him directly. Was I wrong to prepare for that? Tariq said nothing. His eyes moved between the phone screen and the instrument panel, between the evidence of his double life and the reality that he was currently flying a commercial aircraft full of people who had no idea their captain was being confronted with 7 years of infidelity at cruising altitude. I found your wife's Instagram, Fah said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Did you know it's public now? For 3 years you told me it was private, that I couldn't see it, that you kept your family life separate to protect me. But it's been public for 6 months, Tariq. 6 months of photos I could have been seeing. She swiped to a different folder on her phone. Screenshots from Nora's Instagram account. Tariq saw his own face repeated across the screen, at family gatherings, at his nephew's graduation, at an anniversary dinner with his wife. This one is my favorite, Fah said, zooming in on a particular photo. It showed Tariq and Nora at a restaurant, both dressed elegantly, toasting with champagne glasses. The caption read, 12 years of blessings. Alhamdulillah. That was posted 3 months ago, Fah continued. The same week you told me you'd finally talk to her about divorce. The same week you said she'd taken it better than expected, that you were moving forward with filing papers. You were lying, weren't you? It's complicated. It's not complicated. Her voice rose, then dropped again as she remembered where they were. It's actually very simple. You're married. You've always been married. You were never separated. You never filed for divorce. You just lied. For 7 years, you lied. Tariq's mind raced through possible responses, possible explanations, possible ways to de-escalate this situation and get Fah out of the cockpit before Saeed returned, or before someone noticed how long she'd been gone from the cabin. But every explanation felt hollow. Every justification crumbled before it reached his lips. Because she was right. It was simple. He'd lied. What do you want? He asked finally. What do I want? Fah laughed, a sound that held 7 years of accumulated hurt. I want my 20s back. I want the marriage proposals I turned down. I want the children I don't have because I was waiting for you. I want the life I could have built if I hadn't believed a married man who said he loved me. She moved closer into his peripheral vision. But since I can't have any of that, I'll settle for honesty. Right now. Right here. Tell me the truth, Tariq. Were you ever going to leave her? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady hum of the aircraft's engines and the occasional beep from the instrument panel. Outside, the Arabian Sea stretched endlessly below, dark blue water catching the midday sun. No, Tariq said finally. No, I wasn't. Fah had been expecting it, had known it really, for months now, but hearing him actually say it still felt like a physical blow. 7 years of hope, of patience, of trust, evaporating with 2 words. Why? Her voice cracked. If you never intended to marry me, Why did you keep me for 7 years? Why not just let me go? Find someone who would actually build a life with me. Because I did love you. I do love you. Tariq turned to face her, and she saw something genuine in his eyes, for the first time in this conversation. But loving you and leaving my wife, those are two different things. In my culture, my position, my family's expectations. Your culture allows divorce, Tariq. Islam allows divorce. You just didn't want to face the consequences. The consequences would have destroyed everything. My family's reputation, my standing in the community, my career, your career. Fast's voice turned sharp. You think Gulf Star would have fired you for getting divorced? People get divorced, Tariq. It happens. Life continues. You don't understand. My wife's family, my father's connections, everything I've built is tied to that marriage. If I left Nora, I wouldn't just lose a wife. I'd lose my position, my family's respect, access to. He stopped, hearing how it sounded, hearing what he was actually saying. So I was just convenient, Fast said slowly. A pressure valve, the excitement you couldn't get at home, without any of the risk of actually disrupting your real life. Tariq wanted to deny it, wanted to explain that it was more complicated than that his feelings for her were real even if his intentions had never been honest. But looking at her face, at the woman who'd given him 7 years of her life based on promises he'd never intended to keep, he couldn't find the words. I turned down 2 marriage proposals for you, Fast said quietly. Did I ever tell you that? You mentioned. No, I didn't just mention it. I'm telling you now, specifically, so you understand. 2 men. Good men. One was a businessman in Bangkok, successful, kind, wanted to marry me and start a family. The other was a doctor I met on a flight to Singapore. Both of them offered me exactly what you kept promising. A legitimate relationship, marriage, children, a future. She pulled up more photos on her phone. Screenshots of text conversations with these men, preserved as evidence of roads not taken. I said no to both of them, told them I was in love with someone, that I was waiting for him to finalize his divorce, that I believed in our future together. They thought I was stupid. Turns out they were right. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You never meant? Her voice shook with rage. You meant every single thing you did, Tariq. You meant to keep me available. You meant to have your perfect family life at home and your exciting affair abroad. You meant to lie every single time I asked about the divorce. Don't insult me by pretending this was all some accident. Tariq's jaw tightened. So what now? You came here to tell me you hate me? Fine. I understand. When we land in Bangkok, we can talk about. No. Fast's fingers moved across her phone screen. We're not waiting until Bangkok. We're not waiting at all. You're going to choose. Right now. Me or her. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Choose, Tariq. Right here, right now, at 35,000 feet. Call your wife. Tell her about me. Tell her you want a divorce. Or, she held up her phone, finger hovering over the send button. Or I send everything to her. Every photo. Every receipt. Every voice recording of you promising to marry me. All of it. Right now. Tariq felt his chest tighten. Don't do this, please. If you send those photos, you'll destroy my family. My children. Your children. Fast's eyes blazed. What about the children you promised me? The ones we were going to have together? Were those lies too? The silence was answer enough. 7 years, Fast whispered. I gave you 7 years. I gave you my 20s. I gave you my trust. And you gave me nothing but lies and an apartment you could walk away from whenever you wanted. Her thumb moved toward the send button. Wait, Tariq started. She tapped the screen. The first photo sent. Tariq and Fah kissing on the Pont d'Arts bridge in Paris, his wedding ring catching the light, the Eiffel Tower visible in the background. Timestamp, 6 months ago. Recipient, Nora Almezroui. What did you do? Tariq's voice was hollow. What I should have done years ago. Fah tapped again. Another photo sent, this one from the Dubai Marina apartment, intimate and unmistakably damning. Stop! Tariq stood abruptly, his captain's chair rolling back. Give me the phone. No. A third photo sent. Then a fourth. Images from Singapore, from London, from hotel rooms across continents. 7 years of evidence, each photo a nail in the coffin of Tariq's carefully constructed life. Tariq grabbed for the phone. Fah twisted away, her back against the cockpit door. He lunged again, and this time his hand caught her wrist. They struggled, the phone held high between them like a prize neither could afford to lose. A fifth photo sent during the struggle. "Stop sending them," Tariq shouted. "Stop lying," Fah screamed back. They were both beyond reason now, beyond the careful control that had kept them separate for 7 years. 7 years of suppressed emotion, of hidden resentment, of unspoken truth erupted in the cramped cockpit, while autopilot maintained course and 342 passengers sat oblivious below. Fah's elbow connected with Tariq's face. He tasted blood. His grip on her wrist tightened. She kicked out, her shoe connecting with his knee, sending him stumbling backward into the instrument panel. An alarm blared, high-pitched, insistent, terrifying. Autopilot disengaged. The aircraft's nose dipped sharply as Tariq's weight against the control column pushed it forward. In the cabin, passengers screamed. Drinks flew from tray tables. Overhead bins popped open. Flight attendants grabbed for fixed objects, their training kicking in even as their minds struggled to understand why the plane was suddenly diving. In seat 1A, Layla Al-Mansouri looked up from her laptop, heart hammering, thinking clearly and simply, "This is how I die." In the cockpit, Tariq fought to regain his balance. His hands found the control column, pulled back hard, fighting the dive he'd accidentally initiated. The aircraft's nose came up, slowly, too slowly, the altimeter spinning downward as they lost 1,000 feet, 1,500, 2,000. "You'll crash the plane," he shouted at Fah. But Fah was beyond hearing, beyond rational thought. 7 years of waiting, of believing, of being not quite enough had crystallized into pure rage. If he wouldn't choose her, if he'd wasted her life for nothing, then why should any of this continue? Why should he get to land safely, walk away, continue his perfect double life while she was left with nothing? Her hands reached for the control column. "If I can't have you," she screamed. "She won't either." Tariq grabbed her around the waist, physically hauling her away from the controls. The aircraft leveled out, autopilot re-engaging automatically when it sensed the dangerous attitude. A safety feature designed for exactly this kind of emergency. The nose came up, the wings found level. The altimeter stopped its downward spin. But inside the cockpit, nothing was level anymore. Tariq slammed Fah against the back wall. She clawed at his face, her nails raking across his cheek, drawing blood. He felt the sting, felt warm liquid running down to his jaw, but he didn't let go. Couldn't let go, because she'd just tried to crash the plane. She'd just tried to kill everyone aboard because she was angry at him. "You're insane," he shouted. "I loved you," she screamed back. Her knee came up, aiming for his groin. He twisted, took the blow on his thigh. Pain radiated up his leg, but he held on. Both of them locked in a struggle that was part fight, part embrace, part 7 years of unresolved. Everything crashing together in the worst possible place at the worst possible time. The phone fell from Fah's hand, skittering across the cockpit floor. On its screen, still visible, still glowing, message 6 of 9 sent successfully. The photos were still uploading, still sending, the satellite connection maintaining its deadly work while they fought. 7 years. Fah's voice broke. "I gave you 7 years. Her hands clawed at his face again. Tariq felt skin tear, felt more blood. His uniform jacket ripped as she grabbed the fabric. They were animals now, not a captain and flight attendant, not even a man and his mistress, just 2 people who'd lied to each other and themselves for so long that truth could only come out as violence. And then Tariq's hands found her throat. He didn't plan it, didn't think about it. His mind wasn't working in terms of decisions or consequences. There was only the immediate need to make the stop, to silence the screaming, to end the threat to his aircraft, his passengers, his life, his reputation, everything. His fingers closed around her neck. Fah's eyes went wide. Her hands immediately went to his wrists, trying to pull them away, but he was stronger. Had always been stronger. For 7 years, that strength had been used to hold her, to lift her, to make love to her. Now it was being used to squeeze her throat closed. She made a choking sound. Her legs kicked out, connecting with the instrument panel, with his shins, with air. Her fingernails dug into his wrists, breaking skin, drawing blood that would later be used as evidence in a Thai courtroom. Tariq's face was a mask of rage and fear and desperation. This woman was destroying everything. The photos she'd sent, 7 of them now, 8, 9 as the phone continued its automated upload, were detonating his marriage, his family, his reputation. In Abu Dhabi, his wife was probably looking at them right now. His father, his brothers, everyone who mattered. Everything he'd protected for 7 years was gone because of her. So he squeezed harder. Fast struggles were weakening. Her kicks became less coordinated. The hands pulling at his wrists lost their strength. Her eyes, which had held so much accusation and hurt moments before, now held only terror. The cockpit voice recorder captured everything. Every gasping breath, every choking sound, every second of the 3 minutes it takes to manually strangle someone to death. Evidence that would later be played in a courtroom, that would make jurors look away, that would destroy any claim of self-defense or accident. 3 minutes is a long time when you're killing someone. Long enough to think, long enough to stop, long enough to realize what you're doing and make a different choice. Tariq didn't stop. At 2 minutes, Fast's hands fell away from his wrists. Her legs stopped kicking. Her body went slack in his grip. 3 minutes, she was dead. Tariq released her, stepping back. Fast's body crumpled to the cockpit floor, lifeless, her flight attendant uniform still perfectly pressed, her hair still pulled back in the regulation style. She looked like she was sleeping, except for the bruises on her throat, except for the way her eyes stared at nothing. Tariq stood over her, his hands shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind utterly unable to process what he'd just done. On the floor beside Fast's body, her phone glowed with a final notification. All messages sent successfully to Noura Al-Mazrouei. 9 photos, 9 pieces of evidence, 9 images that proved beyond any doubt that Captain Tariq Al-Mazrouei had been living a lie for 7 years. Outside the cockpit door, he heard movement, footsteps, then pounding. Captain Al-Mazrouei. Saeed's voice, urgent and afraid. What's happening? I heard the alarms. Tariq looked at the door, looked at Fast's body, looked at his hands, which were shaking so badly he could barely control them. Blood on his face from her scratches, blood on his wrists from her nails, his uniform torn and disheveled. The cockpit door's emergency access code was being entered. 30 seconds until it unlocked automatically. 30 seconds to decide what story to tell. Tariq's mind, which had been completely blank with rage moments before, suddenly snapped into cold, calculating focus. He was a pilot. Pilots were trained for emergencies, trained to assess situations quickly and make decisions under pressure. He looked at Fast's body and made a decision. He grabbed her wrists, positioned her hands near the control column as if she'd been reaching for it, scratched his own face deeper with his fingernails, adding to the wounds she'd already made, tore his uniform jacket more deliberately, knocked over the small meal tray, scattering its contents across the floor, creating a scene that matched the story forming in his mind. The door clicked. The emergency access had completed its sequence. Saeed burst into the cockpit, his young face pale with fear. Captain, what? He froze. His eyes went from Tariq's bloodied face to the destroyed cockpit to the woman's body on the floor. His mouth opened but no sound came out. She tried to crash the plane, Tariq heard himself say. His voice was steady, calm, the voice of a captain reporting an emergency. She came in, locked the door, went for the controls, said she'd kill everyone if I didn't. He stopped, let his voice break convincingly. I tried to restrain her. She fought. I didn't mean to, it was an accident. She just wouldn't stop. Saeed stared at him, trying to reconcile this scene with anything that made sense. The scratches on Tariq's face were real. The torn uniform was real. The body on the floor was undeniably real. Is she? Saeed couldn't finish the sentence. She's dead. Tariq let those words hang in the air. She tried to crash the plane and I stopped her and now she's dead. Saeed looked at the instrument panel. The autopilot was engaged. Course and altitude were stable. Whatever had happened here, the aircraft was currently flying normally. 342 passengers were alive and unaware. We need to land, Saeed said, his training taking over. Emergency landing. Mumbai is closest. We need to declare. No. Tariq's voice was firm. We continue to Bangkok. Captain, there's a dead body in the cockpit. We can't just. We continue to Bangkok. The shout made Saeed step back. Listen to me. If we declare an emergency, if we land in Mumbai, there will be panic. Investigations. The passengers will know something went wrong. We'll be detained. Our careers will be over. Our careers? Captain, a woman is dead. A woman who tried to crash this aircraft. Tariq grabbed Saeed's shoulders, looked directly into his eyes. You didn't see it, but I did. She was erratic, unstable. She came in here and went straight for the controls. The dive you felt? That was her. I saved 342 lives, Saeed. I stopped her before she could kill everyone. Saeed's eyes moved to Fath's body, to the positioning of her hands that Tariq had so carefully arranged. The story fit the scene. And Saeed was 29 years old, on his first year of long-haul routes, standing in a cockpit with his captain who had 15 years of experience and 0 disciplinary marks on his record. We continue to Bangkok, Tariq said again, more gently this time. We tell the cabin crew there was a medical emergency, a seizure. We maintain calm and we handle this professionally when we land. Do you understand? Saeed looked at him for a long moment. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that they should land immediately, that the captain's story didn't quite add up. But Tariq was the captain, and Saeed had been trained, above all else, to follow the captain's orders. Yes, sir, he heard himself say. Together, they covered Fath's body with a blanket from the crew rest area. They cleaned up the visible blood with tissues. Tariq changed into his spare uniform shirt, keeping the torn one hidden in his flight bag. They composed themselves, 2 professionals dealing with a tragic in-flight emergency. Then Tariq opened the cockpit door and called for the senior flight attendant. The senior flight attendant's name was Apinya Srisawat. She was 43 years old, had been flying for Siam Sky Airways for 18 years, and had seen everything from heart attacks to panic attacks to passengers going into labor at 35,000 feet. But when she stepped into the cockpit at Captain Al-Mazroui's request and saw the blanket-covered shape on the floor, her professional composure faltered for just a moment. Captain! Her eyes moved from the blanket to Tariq's face, taking in the scratches, the torn uniform collar he hadn't quite managed to straighten. What happened? Siriporn had a medical emergency, Tariq said, his voice level, controlled, carrying the authority of 15 years commanding aircraft. A severe seizure. We did everything we could, but she didn't survive. Pinya's hand went to her mouth. She'd worked with Fa for 6 years, had watched the younger woman navigate the complicated world of international flying, had noticed over the past months that something seemed to be weighing on her. But a seizure? Fa had never mentioned any medical condition, never shown any signs of, I need you to keep the cabin calm, Tariq continued, stepping slightly to block her view of the body. We're continuing to Bangkok where medical personnel will be waiting. The passengers cannot know what happened. Do you understand? We cannot create panic. Pinya's training warred with her instinct. The training said, follow the captain's orders, maintain cabin safety, keep passengers calm. The instinct said, something is wrong, this doesn't feel right. Why are there scratches on his face? Why does the cockpit look like there was a struggle? But she was a senior flight attendant, not an investigator. And Captain Al-Mazroui was a respected pilot, Gulfstar's senior long-haul captain, a man with an impeccable safety record. Yes, Captain, she heard herself say. I'll inform the crew. She backed out of the cockpit, the door closing behind her. For a moment she stood in the small galley area, her hand pressed against the wall, trying to process what she'd just seen. Behind that door, one of her colleagues, a woman she'd shared countless flights with, countless crew hotel rooms with, countless late-night conversations about life and love and the peculiar loneliness of living in airports, was dead under a blanket. And something about Captain Al-Mazroui's story felt wrong. But what could she do? They were 4 hours from Bangkok, 35,000 feet over the Bay of Bengal. She couldn't exactly demand a police investigation mid-flight. And if the captain said it was a medical emergency, if he said they were handling it properly by continuing to their destination, then that's what they would do. She gathered the other flight attendants in the rear galley, out of passenger earshot, spoke in a low voice about the tragedy, about maintaining professionalism, about ensuring the passengers remained comfortable and unaware. The other attendants reacted with shock, with tears, with the particular grief of losing a colleague who becomes family when you spend more time together in the sky than on the ground. What kind of seizure? One of the younger attendants asked. I didn't know Fa had epilepsy. I don't know the details, Apinya said quietly. The captain is handling it. We need to trust his judgment and do our jobs. But even as she said it, even as she moved back into the cabin with a professional smile to check on passengers and refill drinks and pretend everything was normal. A small voice in the back of her mind kept whispering, "Something is wrong." In seat 1A, Layla Al-Mansouri was trying to focus on her laptop, on the presentation she needed to prepare for the medical conference. But her hands were still shaking from the sudden dive 20 minutes ago. The plane had dropped, violent and terrifying, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then it had leveled out, and the captain's voice had come over the intercom, calm, reassuring, explaining that they'd experienced minor turbulence but everything was under control. But Layla had flown enough to know that wasn't normal turbulence. That was something else, something wrong. She'd noticed the flight attendants whispering to each other with urgent expressions. Noticed the senior attendant disappear toward the front of the aircraft and return looking pale and shaken. Noticed the way the crew's smiles seemed forced now, their movements just slightly off. Something had happened, something more than turbulence. Layla pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages on the airplane Wi-Fi. The family group chat was unusually active for a Friday afternoon. Messages from her aunt, from cousins, all marked urgent. She opened the thread and felt her stomach drop. Photos, intimate photos of her cousin Nora's husband with another woman. The messages were chaotic, shock, anger, disbelief. Her uncle demanding to know where these photos came from. Her aunt crying about family honor. Nora's own message, sent an hour ago, "I'm filing for divorce. Don't contact me today." Layla stared at the photos, trying to reconcile them with the man she knew peripherally from family gatherings. Tariq had always seemed respectable, devout, the kind of husband families pointed to as an example. And now these photos showed him kissing another woman in Paris, lying in bed with her in what looked like a Dubai apartment, 7 years of documented infidelity. The timestamp on the first photo's arrival, 2:47 p.m. Abu Dhabi time, which would have been, Layla did the mental math, about an hour and a half ago. Mid-flight, she looked toward the cockpit, hidden behind its closed door. Then a thought crystallized, sharp and cold. What's the captain's name on this flight? She pulled up her boarding pass on her phone. Flight EY401. Captain T. Al-Mazrouei. T. Al-Mazrouei. Tariq Al-Mazrouei. Her cousin's husband. The husband whose affair had just been exposed via photos sent. She checked the timestamps. While this flight was already in the air, Layla's mind raced through implications. The sudden dive. The nervous flight attendants. Something happening in the cockpit that passengers weren't being told about. And somewhere up there, behind that locked door, was a man whose entire life had just been destroyed by 9 photographs. She opened her laptop's browser, connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, and began typing a message to her supervisor at the Research Institute in Bangkok. Just in case. Just as a record of her concerns. Because if something was wrong, if the sudden dive and the exposed affair and the nervous crew were all connected somehow, then someone should know. She hit send, then sat back in her seat, eyes fixed on the cockpit door, and waited. In the cockpit, for hours stretched ahead like an eternity. Tariq flew with mechanical precision, responding to air traffic control, making minor course corrections, maintaining the perfect facade of a captain in complete control. Beside him, Saeed sat rigidly in the co-pilot's seat, his eyes occasionally flickering to the blanket-covered shape behind them, his mind clearly struggling with what he'd seen and what he'd been told. 3 feet behind them, Fast's body lay cold and still. The phone that had started everything was in Tariq's flight bag now, powered off, evidence that he'd need to destroy or explain or somehow make disappear before anyone else could examine it. But even as he flew, even as he maintained the performance of normalcy, Tariq's own phone, locked in the same flight bag, was receiving message after message. His wife, his brothers, his father. Each notification a small explosion, each vibration another piece of his life crumbling. He didn't need to read them to know what they said. The photos Fah had sent had done their work. By the time he landed in Bangkok, his marriage would be over. His family's respect would be gone. His reputation would be destroyed. But he'd be alive. He'd be free of Fah and her demands and her evidence and her threat to expose everything. She'd forced his hand, forced him to choose, and he'd chosen survival. Even if survival meant living with what he'd done. "Captain," Saeed said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. "When we land, what happens?" "We tell the truth," Tariq said. That she had a medical emergency and didn't survive. The Thai authorities will investigate, but it's straightforward. A tragic accident during flight. But the scratches on your face. She was seizing. I tried to help her and she struck out, confused, not in control. It's consistent with a major seizure event. Tariq had been refining the story in his mind for the past hour, filling in details, creating a narrative that fit the physical evidence. We'll both give statements. We'll be honest about what we saw. And then we'll go home. Saeed nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Still, he was 29 years old and Tariq was his captain, and sometimes in aviation you followed orders even when your gut told you something was wrong, because the alternative was chaos. At 3:30 p.m. Bangkok time, Suvarnabhumi International Airport came into view through the cockpit windscreen. Tariq contacted approach control, received clearance for landing, began the descent that would end this nightmare flight and begin a different kind of nightmare entirely. In the cabin, passengers gathered their belongings, stretched their legs, prepared for arrival. None of them knew that a woman had died during their flight. None of them knew their captain was a murderer. They would deplane, collect their luggage, move on with their lives, and maybe later they'd hear something on the news about a tragic medical emergency on flight EY401 and they'd think how lucky they were that it hadn't been worse. But for Apinya, standing in the rear galley and watching Bangkok's skyline approach, something still felt wrong. During the flight, she'd used the onboard Wi-Fi to send a message to her supervisor at Siam Sky Airways. Not an official report. Just a note. Just her concerns. Just a record that she'd noticed inconsistencies in the captain's story, that the scratches on his face didn't quite match a seizure response, that something about the whole situation felt off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Captain Al-Mazrui was telling the truth and she was letting emotion cloud her professional judgment. But Apinya had been flying for 18 years, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. And her instincts were screaming that Siriporn Chitpanya hadn't died of a seizure. The landing was smooth, textbook perfect. Captain Tariq Al-Mazrui had made thousands of landings in his career, and this one was no different technically. The wheels touched down gently, the reversers engaged, the aircraft decelerated smoothly down the runway. But as they taxied toward the gate, Tariq saw something that made his chest tighten. Police vehicles. Multiple police vehicles. Not just airport security but actual Thai police, waiting at the gate where flight EY401 would dock. "Captain," Saeed said, his voice tight, "that's not standard medical response." Tariq said nothing. His mind was racing through possibilities. Maybe it was routine when a death occurred on an aircraft. Maybe Thai authorities always sent police to investigate. Maybe Apinya had reported her concerns. Maybe someone had questioned his story. Maybe the truth he'd tried to bury under a blanket and a false narrative was already surfacing. The aircraft docked. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began standing, opening overhead bins, gathering their belongings. Normal sounds of a flight ending. But through the cockpit window, Tariq could see plainclothes detectives boarding through the jet bridge. This wasn't a medical response. This was a criminal investigation. And Captain Tariq Al-Mazrui, who had spent 4 hours believing he might actually get away with this, realized that his careful cover-up was already falling apart. The passengers deplaned slowly, completely unaware of the police presence waiting just beyond the gate. Layla Al-Mansuri gathered her laptop and carry-on, moving with the crowd, but her eyes were fixed on the cockpit door. She'd spent the last hour of the flight watching flight attendants whisper urgently to each other, watching the senior attendant disappear multiple times toward the front of the aircraft, watching the forced normalcy that suggested something very abnormal had happened. As she entered the jet bridge, she glanced back and saw what the other passengers couldn't see from their angle. Police officers boarding the aircraft, moving with purpose toward the cockpit. She knew. Somehow she just knew. Her cousin's husband was on that flight deck. His affair had been exposed mid-flight. Something had happened. Something bad. Layla pulled out her phone as she walked through the terminal, typing quickly to Nora. "I was on Tariq's flight. Police just boarded. Something happened. Call me when you can." In the cockpit, Tariq stood to face the 2 Thai police detectives who'd just entered. One was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and the calm expression of someone who'd seen everything. The other was younger, female, taking in every detail of the scene with sharp, analytical eyes. "Captain Al-Mazrui?" the older detective said in English. I am Detective Samchai Presert. This is Detective Niran Kongpresert. We understand there was a death on your aircraft. Yes. Tariq's voice was steady. One of the flight attendants had a medical emergency. A seizure. We did everything we could, but she didn't survive. Her body is... He gestured toward the blanket-covered shape. Detective Niran was already moving toward it, crouching down, lifting the blanket carefully. Her eyes immediately went to Fast's throat, to the clearly visible bruising there. When she looked up at Tariq, her expression had changed from professional interest to something harder. Captain, these marks on the deceased's throat are consistent with manual strangulation, she said quietly. This was not a seizure. Tariq felt the world tilt. She was fighting during the seizure. I tried to restrain her, to keep her from hurting herself. She was thrashing. For how long? Detective Samchai asked. I don't know. A few minutes. Maybe 3 or 4. 3 or 4 minutes of sustained pressure to produce bruising of this severity? The detective's eyebrows rose. Captain, I think we need to have a longer conversation. And I notice you have significant scratches on your face. When did those occur? During the struggle. When I was trying to help her. Help her by putting your hands around her throat? Detective Niran stood, pulling latex gloves from her pocket. Captain Almezrui, I'm going to need you to step out of the cockpit. This is now a crime scene. The word hit like a physical blow. Crime scene. Not accident. Not tragedy. Crime. Saeed, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke. Detective, I can confirm that. He stopped, and Tariq saw the exact moment when the young co-pilot's certainty crumbled. Saw him remembering the scene he'd walked into, the way Tariq had positioned the body, the story that had seemed plausible 4 hours ago but now, under police scrutiny, felt increasingly hollow. You can confirm what? Detective Samchai asked gently. I wasn't in the cockpit when it happened. I was on my rest break. When I returned, the captain said she tried to crash the plane, that he'd had to restrain her, that it was an accident. Did you see evidence that she tried to crash the plane? Saeed looked at the instrument panel, at the autopilot controls that showed no signs of interference, at the flight data recorder that would tell the real story of what had happened in this cockpit. No, he admitted quietly. I only saw the aftermath. Tariq felt his carefully constructed narrative dissolving. She sent photos to my wife, he heard himself say. Explicit photos from our relationship. She was destroying my marriage, my life. She came in here and... He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted. Not a medical emergency. Not a seizure. Confrontation. A motive. Detective Niran was already photographing the scene with her phone. The body position. The scratches on Tariq's face. The torn uniform. Every detail that told a story very different from the one he'd been trying to sell. Captain Almezrui, Detective Samchai said formally, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent. The rest of the words blurred together. Tariq felt handcuffs close around his wrists, felt himself being led out of the cockpit he'd commanded for 4 hours, past the empty first-class cabin, down the jet bridge where his crew stood watching with expressions of shock and horror. Apina met his eyes as he passed. She didn't say anything, but he saw it in her face. I knew something was wrong. In the terminal, a few passengers who'd been slow to leave saw their captain being led away in handcuffs. Phones came out immediately. By the time Tariq was placed in the back of a police car, photos were already hitting social media. Captain arrested. Murder on flight EY401. The hashtags began trending within minutes. And in Abu Dhabi, Noura Almezrui sat in her villa surrounded by the 9 photos that had destroyed her marriage, watching the news alert flash across her phone. Gulf Star captain arrested in Bangkok for murder of flight attendant. She clicked the article. Read the details. Saw her husband's name. Saw a photo of him being led away in handcuffs, his pilot's stripes visible even with his hands bound behind him. The affair had been devastating. Learning that her husband had maintained a secret relationship for 7 years, that he'd lied to her face for thousands of days, that their entire marriage had been a performance, it had shattered her. But this was something else entirely. Her husband wasn't just an adulterer. He was a murderer. Her phone rang. Layla. I was on the flight, her cousin said without preamble. I saw him get arrested. Noura, I think the woman he was having an affair with was on the flight. I think something happened in the cockpit. Nora looked at the photos on her phone, at the woman's face, repeated across 9 images. A beautiful face, a young face. Now, according to the news report, a dead face. Her name was Siriporn, Nora said quietly. She was a flight attendant, Siam Sky Airways. They met 7 years ago on a layover in Bangkok. How do you know all that? Because the photos she sent me? Each one has a timestamp, a location, metadata. I've been sitting here for 4 hours going through every single one, building a timeline of my husband's affair. And now I know how it ended. Layla was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? Nora looked at her wedding photo on the wall, looked at the perfect villa they'd built together, looked at the life that was now revealed to be nothing but an elaborate lie. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth, she said. Not the version his family will try to sell. Not some story about a mentally unstable woman who attacked a pilot. The real truth, that he lied to me for 7 years, lied to her for 7 years, and when she finally forced him to face his lies, he killed her. She ended the call and began composing a statement. Not for family, not for friends, for the press, for the public, for everyone who would try to protect Tariq's reputation at the expense of the dead woman's dignity. By evening, her statement was public. My husband is a liar and a murderer. Do not let his family buy his innocence with our name. The woman who died today was lied to for 7 years. She deserved better than this. She deserved justice. In Bangkok's Thong Lor police station, Tariq sat in an interview room facing Detective Somchai and a growing pile of evidence. They'd recovered Fast's phone, found the folder labeled 7 years, seen the photos she'd sent, the timeline of messages, the documentation of broken promises. They'd pulled the cockpit voice recorder from the aircraft, listening to the entire confrontation, Fast's accusations, Tariq's admissions, the struggle, and finally the 3 minutes of sounds that could only be one thing: murder. The voice recorder doesn't lie, Detective Somchai said quietly. We hear her asking you to choose. We hear you admitting you were never going to leave your wife. We hear her sending the photos. And then we hear you killing her. For 3 minutes, Captain. 3 minutes of sustained strangulation. That's not self-defense. That's not an accident. That's murder. Tariq's lawyer, hastily summoned from Gulf Star's Bangkok office, leaned forward. My client was protecting the aircraft. She threatened to crash the plane. The flight data recorder shows no such attempt, Detective Niren interrupted. The autopilot was engaged throughout. The only disruption was when your client fell into the control column during the struggle. Ms. Chitpanya never touched the controls. She tried to. We have the entire incident on audio, counselor. Ms. Chitpanya made a rhetorical statement about crashing. She never actually attempted it. What we do have is 3 minutes of your client strangling her to death while she begged him to stop. The lawyer fell silent, because there was no defense for what the recordings showed. No justification for 3 minutes of sustained violence. No story that could make this anything other than what it was: murder. Over the next 8 months, the case consumed headlines across 2 countries. Thai prosecutors charged Tariq with first-degree murder. His defense team, funded by his family's considerable resources, argued crime of passion, extreme emotional disturbance, provocation by the victim. But the evidence was overwhelming. The cockpit voice recorder, the forensic analysis showing defensive wounds on Fast's wrists where she'd tried to pull his hands away, the DNA under her fingernails, the photos that established motive. Saeed's testimony that Tariq had refused to make an emergency landing, had instead orchestrated a cover-up. The trial played out in a Bangkok courtroom while the world watched. Nora attended, sitting in the gallery, refusing to support her soon-to-be ex-husband but determined to bear witness for the woman who died. Fast's mother, Niren Chitpanya, attended every day, clutching a photo of her daughter in her flight attendant uniform. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The judge's sentence came swift and final: life imprisonment in Bang Kwang Central Prison. No possibility of parole. No extradition to serve time in the UAE. A Thai citizen had been murdered in Thai airspace, and justice would be served under Thai law. In Abu Dhabi, the Al-Mazrui family's reputation crumbled. Tariq's father, who'd spent decades building business connections and social standing, found doors closing, partners backing out of deals. invitations quietly withdrawn. The stain of murder and adultery proved too much even for money and influence to wash away. Nora's divorce finalized within 6 months. She changed her last name, moved to a different emirate, started over. She never visited Tariq in prison, never took his calls. To her, the man she'd married had died the day those 9 photos arrived on her phone. And in Bang Kwang prison, Captain Tariq Almezroui, prisoner number 487329, sat in a cell that measured 6 feet by 9 feet, smaller than any cockpit he'd ever flown. His days were measured not in flight hours but in concrete walls and iron bars. His uniform was prison gray instead of pilot blue. His view was not endless sky but a narrow window 18 inches wide. At night, in the silence, he thought about September 15th, thought about the moment his hands closed around Fast's throat, thought about the 3 minutes that destroyed 3 lives, Fast's, Nora's, and his own. He could have let her send the photos, could have faced the consequences of his lies. Disgrace wasn't death. Divorce wasn't death. Loss of reputation wasn't death. But he'd made it death. He'd chosen murder over honesty. He'd chosen violence over accountability. And now, for the rest of his life, he would live with that choice in a cell smaller than the cockpit where he'd made it. The last piece of evidence recovered from Fast's phone was a message she'd drafted but never finished, found in her notes app. It was time-stamped 10:42 a.m. on September 15th, 33 minutes before flight EY401 departed. It read, "Today I take control of my life. Today I stop waiting. Today I force him to choose, and whatever he chooses, at least I'll finally know the truth. At least I'll finally be free." She never finished typing it, because she never imagined that forcing Tariq to choose would cost her everything, that the truth would come with a price she couldn't pay, that freedom would mean death. The message remained unfinished. A life remained unfinished. And in a prison cell in Bangkok, a pilot who'd once had everything sat with the knowledge that he'd thrown it all away. His career, his family, his freedom, because he couldn't face the simple truth that Siriporn Chitpanya had spent 7 years trying to make him see. You can't live 2 lives forever. Eventually, you have to choose. And when you choose violence instead of honesty, everyone loses.